What did Nancy Pelosi know about the National Guard, and does she take any responsibility for not accepting President Trump's offer? Barry Loudermilk's been hard at work. Not a lot of splash, not a lot of TV. Just doing his thing to try and figure out what the hell this January 6th committee was up to. We know from the congressman, he's the chairman of the subcommittee looking into it, they destroyed an enormous amount of data. And Barry Loudermilk, I want to thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. So what have you found out now with respect to the National Guard?
Well, there's still a lot of questions regarding the National Guard, but as you've mentioned, it's been a bit of a challenge doing the investigation when so much of the documentation and information that was supposed to have been archived was not. And so we've had to recreate a lot of the information that the Select Committee had, which included the film footage that HBO had of the documentary they were filming regarding Nancy Pelosi, which the Select Committee had all of that footage, but they didn't archive it. And so I reached out to HBO. I was a little bit surprised they responded. I sent a letter to them asking for them to provide us with everything that they had provided the Select Committee, really expecting I was going to have to subpoena for it. But lo and behold, Friday, we received all the footage. And so as we started reviewing it, and we see a time that Nancy Pelosi is in the car being evacuated from the Capitol, and as she was talking to her chief of staff, she's asking her questions about why isn't the National Guard here? And then she makes a statement is that I take responsibility for the National Guard not being here, which was interesting because she spent about $20 million in 2 years trying to blame Donald Trump for the National Guard not being there. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of takeaways from that is if Nancy Pelosi really didn't know that the chief of police son had made numerous requests for the National Guard that were turned down. If she didn't turn it down, then who did? If she was surprised that the National Guard wasn't already there, was it her staff? Was it the sergeant at arms? I mean, who was it that was turning down the requests the chief was making, numerous requests for the National Guard that they just didn't like the optics. So it really brings in more questions that we still need to have answered.
Isn't it amazing? Here we are several years away. The Democrats, the media keep talking about it, but they never talk about what happened to security that day. They never really want to get into the National Guard that day. They just dismiss it as a lie. But there's other things too, right? I mean, there was an effort by the Secret Service agent who was in the car with President Trump, as I understand it, with the lies that came out about Trump trying to strangle this agent and so forth. He wanted to testify, and he was prevented, wasn't he?
You're exactly right. This is something that we've just learned recently because these are some of the depositions, the transcripts, that were not archived. These were of the Secret Service agents who the Select Committee did call in, but they sent those over to DHS. Now, we've spent over a year fighting with DHS to get these transcripts, which we finally did. As I'm reading over the interview that the Select Committee did with the driver of the SUV, who, Cassidy Hutchinson claimed that Trump tried to grab the steering wheel from him, and when he wouldn't let him, he turned and tried to choke another agent. At the very beginning of his transcribed interview, his attorney chastises the Select Committee because Cassidy Hutchinson made these unsubstantiated claims in June that they never tried to corroborate her claims. They just took them hook, line, and sinker. That was in June. At the beginning of the interview with the driver, which was in November, his attorney says, we reached out to you, meaning the Select Committee. We reached out to you in July, August, and September, and now it's November. That they had reached out trying to get an interview to correct the record, but they were stonewalled. In November, when they finally interviewed him, they never asked him about that incident. Jeez. In the interview, he had to interject it himself. What that shows me is they had their narrative. They didn't want anything counter to that narrative. that's why they stonewalled him coming in to testify. And then when they finally had him, they just didn't even ask him about, an incident where the president of the United States tried to take control of the SUV from him. I mean, you would think that would be something, especially since there was a worldwide narrative about that they would want to hear his opinion on it.
Mm-hmm. And that means the members of that committee knew that what Hutchinson had testified to, what she said she overheard, was not accurate. And they didn't want the truth to come out, correct? What else explains it?
That's it. I mean, if that was a story that was too good to be true for them. And so if they, normally if you're conducting a real investigation, you hear something that outlandish, I'm going to corroborate that somewhere, at least get somebody who agrees with. But even she claims that Tony Ornato, who is the deputy chief of operations, that he told her that someone else told him that this happened. Well, Tony Ornato testified that he never told her that. And so, again, his was another transcript that was never released to the public. Any of these interviews that didn't just line up with her testimony wasn't released to the public. I have yet to find someone who agreed with any of her testimony. We haven't found that yet. She's on an island unto herself.
We're here with Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Congressman, we talked about this before. Is there any intention of bringing people before your committee and putting them under oath to try to get to the bottom of some of this, like the destruction of the information? We still don't know who the mastermind was behind all that.
Right. Yeah, we are. And we have been bringing in some in various hearings to and put them under oath. And we've gotten a lot of good information there. Of course, it's taken us quite a bit of time to even get the information. Yeah. I mean, when you've got deleted files on hard drives and documents being sent out and videos that were destroyed. But we are at the point right now where we've gotten a lot of information. As you know, as an attorney, you don't ask a question until you got a good idea what the answer is. Well, in our case, we need that, but we also need to know what questions do we need to ask. So we're at that point now where we do need to be bringing people in. We're going to be having a hearing very soon on the intelligence failures, which really plays into Nancy Pelosi and her comment there. I mean, we do know that there were people within the Capitol Police Department that received intelligence that there is a high probability there'll be violence at the Capitol, but that information was never passed on to the chief of police. And now it looks like from her response in the video that it was never passed on to her. So we need to know, why was that intelligence, was it not passed on? Was it intentionally suppressed? Or was it just incompetence on the part of the intelligence division? And then instead of letting the chief of police do an after action and get to the bottom of where the failures were, Nancy Pelosi fired him the next day and promoted to acting chief the very person who was over the intelligence division where the information was suppressed. So don't we also
need to know why the committee didn't pursue this? Why it didn't issue subpoenas?
That is an excellent point.
Why it didn't get to the bottom of this? I mean, shouldn't this be a key issue for the House of Representatives?
It should be. That should have been the number one issue for the Select Committee. And that's a great point, because when you look at Pelosi's video today that we released, where she's surprised, she was unaware, and she's taking responsibility for the failures at the security of the Capitol. Well, the legislation that was passed creating the Select Committee, their top priority was to investigate the security failures at the Capitol. And they didn't do that. There's hardly anything in their report. They had an entire team called the Blue Team that was supposed to investigate that. We have hardly any documentation for them. It's like that team never existed. So if she was that concerned, as I believe she was on January 6th, what changed? Why did she then direct the Select Committee in a different direction to go after Trump instead of truly investigating real security failures that are right in front of your face? This is just some more of the questions that we have. And I've told people I'm not confident that the Capitol is any more secure or significantly more secure than it was that day, because there's never been a real investigation done into the security failures until we started with our committee. And that's one of the areas that we're putting a lot of effort in, and we'll be calling some people in to answer some questions about that very soon.
Are you still getting resistance from the White House, in the form of the redactions and so forth? Are they not coming clean with the material?
We eventually, that's one battle that we won on that one. Now, we haven't received full unredacted copies for our archive purposes, but we're working on that. But what we were able to do is finally, the White House sent us redacted copies, and we kept fighting back until they invited us to come to the White House and sit down and read them there. And so we were able to get the full context of those missing transcribed interviews. And the same thing with the Department of Homeland Security. We continued to fight with them until we were given access to the full unredacted portions, and which is important because there are some things that I can understand that you need to redact for national security purposes. We're not trying to reveal anything like that, but we need to know, was anything redacted politically? And so we've been able to access, and one thing is it ended up being more Secret Service depositions than we knew of. We knew we were missing 8, but it turned out there were 12. And so we gained a lot more information there. And now we're working with the Pentagon, or trying to work with the Pentagon to get information from them. But we started investigating once the National Guard was requested, once Nancy Pelosi finally agreed to formally request the National Guard, which as a constitutionalist, you understand the separation of powers. Mm-hmm. The president can't send the National Guard. It has to be requested. Once they got the request and the Secretary of Defense approved the deployment, it was still 3.5 hours before they actually arrived. So we started looking at what that delay was. And we had whistleblowers that came under oath and testified in committee that it was concerns of the optics by certain people in the Pentagon that they appeared to purposefully delayed deploying the National Guard. They, according to one of the witnesses, testified that they wanted to wait until the violence had settled down before they send the National Guard. Now, these are the guys that are the defenders of the Capitol. They're in riot gear. They're ready to go.
Yeah, why would anybody wait?
Concern over optics.
I mean, it doesn't even make any sense.
They were concerned with the optics.
Yeah.
There's so much that doesn't make sense about this. There's too much politicization of every element. I mean, the Capitol Police, there was political influence there, the National Guard, the Department of Defense. And so we're continuing that investigation, and we're working with the DOD, or trying to. They've been stalling us somewhat, but we're on the verge of sending some subpoenas over there if we don't get access to their IG report, which claims that it was the National Guard that caused the delay. But we have people under oath, senior leadership of the D.C. National Guard, that testified under oath that they were ready to deploy. In fact, the commander even said, I may just go ahead and deploy without orders, because they saw what was happening and they could help. He didn't, but it was a long delay, 3 hours and 20-minute delay between the time the Secretary of Defense said deploy the National Guard, who was ready to deploy in riot gear to go and help. It was 3 hours and 20 minutes before they actually told to go. Mm-hmm. So I never imagined when I took this task on that there would be this level of cover-up or corruption or deception going on. Mm-hmm. And so it's amazing, but I'm also encouraged by the number of good people that we're encountering that are willing to stand up, and some of them are putting their careers at risk to say, look, it's just important we get the truth out.
All right, Congressman, we'll be here ready for more that comes forward. This is pretty big news, though, this video with the audio, that Nancy Pelosi is going on and on about security, and then at the end says it's her responsibility. Well, she's right about that. But the problem is, this January 6th committee was in full cover-up mode, in full attack mode. That's why she picked who she picked from the Republicans. That's why they've destroyed. We have every right to draw the conclusion that the destruction of evidence that they took would have been very beneficial to getting all the facts out, but facts that they didn't want to get out. We have every right to make that conclusion, or otherwise they wouldn't have destroyed it. Congressman, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again, my friend.
All right, Mark. Thank you.
All right, Congressman Barry Loudermilk, he's working at it.